Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. We tend to be a pretty US centric show here, but of course, we have a lot of listeners from across the pond, and the world of UK politics has gotten pretty wild. Here recently, there's been a lot of changes, possibly a seismic shift in the way that the election is going to work, the upcoming election. And so I wanted to bring on one of my favorite Substackers and YouTubers to discuss the situation over in the UK. Morgoth, thank you so much for coming on, man.
No problem. Thank you for having me back again, Auron.
Yeah, I want to dive in with this to you because it's always interesting. We end up with these wild situations, and the question is this the one? Is this the big shift? Is this the time that we're going to see a serious change, or is it another one of these, half measures? It feels like something real is happening in England to some extent, but there could be very serious consequences as well. So we'll dive into a little bit of the history of how the situation got this way in the UK, and then what you think will come out of it. But before we do all of that, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Hey guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Job Stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what job stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program was designed by Rolf Halse to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by your employer. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their income. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 jobs and went from making $5K a month to making $15K a month. But job stacking hasn't just increased income, it's also helping many of our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he used to pay off personal and student debt while buying a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so you can get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now. You can use the promo code Auron and book your call with Rolf today. All right, Morgoth. So for Americans who might not be familiar with some of the dynamics of British party politics, the Conservative Party has been in charge for a very long time over there, which sounds good, right? That's what you would like in theory. But in practice, it seems that there's been a lot of leading the left from the right in England. It feels like in many ways, the Conservative Party is actually driving a lot of this leftward shift in England. Can you explain kind of the dynamic between the Conservative Party and Labour?
Yeah, I mean, basically, when they came in, which was 14 years ago now, with David Cameron, they had the view that they would just be the heirs to Blair. I mean, somebody put it quite funny on Subs. John Carter on Substack said they were patriots in the streets, but Blairites in the sheets. And that's exactly what they were. All of the quangos and all of these sort of NGOs and all of these extra regulatory bodies and all of these things that makes Blairism work. The Tories actually just expanded on it all and didn't throw any of it out. And this sort of led the way where there's so many memes you see going around just to take the immigration situation. They were voted in on a promise to reduce immigration, which was at highs of sort of 300,000 per year under the previous Labour government, and they've consistently lied. At every election since, they have said, we'll bring it down, and the line on the graph only ever goes up. To the degree, and I think this plays into where we are now. There's so much else I could get into, because all of the woke, crazy LGBT, the rainbow flags, all of that happened on the Tories' watch, as well as the pandemic, all these things. And I think the immigration numbers hit such extraordinary heights in the last 2 years, where they went over, for the first time, over 1 million in a year, which is just preposterous. And I think it's reached such a point where infrastructure is just beginning to break down now. For example, like even if you want to just take the ethnic side of it out of it, which used to be more of the kind of arguments that I would make, and I would regard discussion around housing or how many people are here and overcrowding as being kind of weak source and a bit of a cop out. But it has actually reached the point where people just can't get houses anymore. And people have seen endlessly the numbers coming across in what they call small boats is minor compared to who are flying straight into the airports and chain migration, but it's more visible. And these men actually got put up in these 5-star hotels. And people just became completely despondent. And when we began heading into the election, in our circles, so Academic Agent came up with the 0 seats meme, and I latched onto that quite early as well, because I've got like a visceral hatred of the Tory parties. And the way that we're sort of stuck, of course, which is similar to what you have in America, is where you kind of vote for the least worst. So whenever election time comes around, which is why the Tories have been in for so long, people on the right will say, yeah, I hate the Tories, they'll stab us in the back, but they're always worse than Labour. But the Tories have been so bad that that's actually a difficult argument to make. And in actual fact, somebody like Academic Agent would actually run the numbers on it and say, actually, no, they've been, it is the Tories who are actually the accelerant of crazy progressivism in this country. And so all of this was going on with just the sort of squalor and dilapidation and ruination of it in terms of infrastructure. Even the little things, like you just can't get a dentist appointment anymore. There's a 7-year waiting list on the NHS. There's 6 million people waiting to see for basic surgeries and things on the NHS. Everything is falling apart. And it is because just the sheer amount of people that's coming in. It's the equivalent of about 3 D-Day landings per year going in the wrong direction, coming inward. So in terms of sort of, people will say the government are incompetent, and I've said for a long time, actually they're not. It's actually, if you just want to look at it objectively, it's a sort of brilliant feat of managerial expertise to, in the teeth of public opposition, bring in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people every year, process them, get them housed, get them clothed, get them on the tax system, get them on the benefits or whatever it happens to be. It's just that it's purely malicious and evil. And so when we were heading into this election, we were kicking the 0 seats meme around just as a kind of to hammer the Tories and say, look, the Tories have to be destroyed as a party, and we're done with this business of Labour are going to, it's big, scary Labour are going to come along, make things worse. And it was a way to say, actually, no, when we're done with this, we will just take Labour rather than endure this any longer. So this was kind of where we were. And then just a few weeks ago, the Tories were just historically unpopular, and the main bulk of the population were kind of checked out from the system. We've had enough, because over on the left in Labour, you've got problems of their own with sort of the Israel situation and their own voter base, which were because they cleared out the Corbynites on the left, but that's a whole other story. And they were left with just neoliberal technocrats as well. And so there was this sense that actually probably almost nobody's going to turn out to vote. And so then there's a kind of small clustering of parties to the right of the Tories. They're all kind of called like Reclaim or Reform or, Reunite or Re-this and Re-that. And they never seem to get anywhere. But then Farage came and took hold of the Reform Party, which was, I think, the Brexit Party and related to the Brexit campaign. And he took over a few weeks ago, and it just seems to have set the whole thing on fire. And so to the degree where they have actually overtaken the Tories in the polls, and people now can come out, on social media, and they can say, Well, actually, at this point, if you vote for the Tories, you're voting for Labour. Like, it's swung the other way. Like, basically, and people are now saying that the Tories, that they have to step down because they're splitting the right wing vote and all of this kind of thing. So there's a positive energy, and he's telling, if you look at the Reform Manifesto, it's surprisingly based. It's kind of like a smorgasbord of like things that you want to hear. So I'm kind of in a situation where I feel when it comes to populism on the right, I feel like a battered housewife.
Yeah.
Whenever these sort of Lotharios come swaggering in the room, carrying their bunch of flowers and a box of chocolates, I think, oh great, I really want to get up. But on the other hand, is this going to be like a smack in the mouth later? Like, what's the catch here?
Yeah,
So
it'll be different this time, Morgoth, I promise.
yeah, it's going to be different this time. And so the election is on the 4th of July. And okay, I'm trying to be cynical. I'm trying to sort of, keep my realist sort of hat on and think it, and analyze it from the different perspectives. Because just to sort of broaden it out a little bit, to go back, when the Rishi Sunak announced the election, which was farcical, by the way, he was standing and pouring down rain and everything. Their campaign was so shambolic, and I can go through a few points in a bit on just some of the clunkers that's happened. But my take was that actually, I think somebody somewhere, the Council of Foreign Relations or the Bank of England or people with clout have decided it's time to clear the Tories out and get Labour in because something big is coming down the pipeline. Now, is that going to be war with Russia or more geopolitical strife, or is it going to be economic disaster, or I don't know what. But my view was it's time to take the sort of the knackered old nag of the Tory party and just take it out to pasture and let it lie there. And we can get Labour in with a huge majority, and we can clear the decks and batten down the hatches because there's something big coming. That was my general feeling about it. But then all of a sudden it was Farage and Reform, and there was all of this sort of populism was back on the menu, and it's all about the immigration. And he has genuinely turned it into the immigration election. And so it's as if everybody's just been starved of these kinds of talking points. And you want to do it. You want to smell the roses, and you want to have a nibble on the chocolates. But you're just wondering, okay, where's the knife? Where's the catch? So it just where we are is, well, we're weeks away. We're still 2 weeks away. And there's a lot happening, but as it stands now, it looks like Reform are actually going to knock the Tory parties. I mean, how bad the Tories are performing is a thing in itself, which I could maybe come to in a moment.
Yeah, let's go ahead and head back, put a little bit of history before this, because I think you laid out a good overview of the situation we're in. In the United States, obviously, the Republican Party is a sham. It is a false opposition in many ways. But at the very least, when they get into office, we usually do get some level of increased border restriction. At the very least, they don't leave the borders completely open. They're not encouraging people to come here. There is a noticeable difference in the people entering when Trump was in charge as opposed to when Biden is in charge. But like you said, with the UK situation, it feels like the conservatives were actually the ones who were opening this up. They were making it far worse. They're the ones that are exacerbating it. It's almost like when you have the party that's supposed to be conservative, in many ways, you can then lock in the most liberal gains possible during that time. But how did we end up with Rishi Sunak? Like, what was the chain of events that brought him to power and then put him in a crisis where he had to call an election?
Well, there's something fishy about Rishi Sunak, because what you have in this country are dotted around the country. For the Tory party, it'll usually be in the south of England, in the countryside. So it'll be well-to-do, middle-class English people. And what you have there is safe seats. Rishi Sunak actually got one further up north in Richmond. So when these people, usually they'll come from, like Rishi Sunak, his banking background, very prestigious education, very, very rich wife, and all of this. And he got parachuted into a safe seat. Now, because of a scandal, with Boris Johnson, who was just one of the worst of them all, they got rid of him, and then they had to have a leadership election. And it was Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Liz Truss was just sort of a standard sort of Tory, sort of batty. I would say like she's kind of batty, and she wasn't too bright. She had some horrendously cringe speeches about cheese and pork bellies in France and things. But the Tory leadership actually chose her to be Prime Minister, and it was clear that that wasn't what certain people wanted, particularly not the Bank of England. And so when she was brought in, she only lasted, I think she was in power for about 40 days. And she tried to bring in some relatively minor tax cuts, which is sort of standard kind of Tory or Republican policies, But basically, the Bank of England fiddled around with all kinds of rates and all kinds of market manipulation and dodgy things. And tanked. It was like the economy's falling off a cliff here because of you. And now we have to remember the government just a few years before that had kind of spaffed out hundreds of billions on the pandemic, and they didn't have any of these issues. But for whatever reason, all of a sudden, these relatively minor tax twiddling that Liz Truss was up to, oh no, the economy's going to slide off a cliff. And it basically collapsed all support within her, became this emergency situation. The lines on the graphs were going all over the place, and she was offed, essentially. And so Rishi Sunak, who had lost in the lead among the Tory base themselves, got in more or less by default this time. And that's how he came to power. So he had no public support whatsoever. This was purely a top-down imposition from, in this case, the Bank of England, but I also suspect other friends throughout the Western elite. And so then we got stuck with him again. Obviously you've got the ethnic issue, but then there's also that he is just utterly like no charisma. He's this elitist, and he's just completely out of place. I mean, even somebody like Boris Johnson, who I think's the worst, has this kind of Churchill impression, which he pulls out, this kind of upper class buffoon sort of demeanor. But Rishi Sunak had nothing whatsoever. But I mean, in terms of an actual character, he's just this boring sort of suit. He's not the worst of them, actually. He isn't actually the most dislikable of the people, of the scumbags that the Tories have had in. But so yeah, that's how we ended up getting Sunak, and it was clear that he wasn't popular. What was interesting was that when we head into the election, the Tories didn't actually have to call the election as early as they did. They could have ran it out for at least like 8 months more, or maybe longer. They could have kept kicking it down the end of the road. But for whatever reason, it was just this snap election. Okay, that's why I came to the conclusion something's happening. They want the Tories out. But even then, it was like this. Everything became really farcical. I mean, I've got just the new thingies here. You got Sunak comes out and he announces in the pouring rain that he's calling an election. He's soaked through. And then in the background, you've got somebody plays the Blairite anthem, "Things Can Only Get Better," which it was just farcical. It was just ridiculous, and he was just you would have thought that somebody would have handed an umbrella or something. And then the next day, he took the day off, and he disappeared. But then when he came back the day after that, he announced that they were going to bring in national service for Zoomers, which told everybody, like, basically, I'm going to ship your kids off to die in Ukraine. That's what they took from it. Like the worst possible sort of policies, announcements you can imagine.
Yeah, I watched I watched a video of him like answering a question with a woman in the crowd, and she's like, "Well, what if they don't do military service?" He's like, "Oh, well, we'll have other national services they can do. They'll just be the military option." It's like, "Well, what if they don't want to do that?" It's like, "Well, then we'll just shut down their bank accounts."
Yeah,
Like that was like
yeah. We'll
it
take
was,
away
it was
their
amazing.
driving licenses and we'll
Yeah.
shut down the bank accounts. And then, yeah, that's a vote winner. And then, I mean, just to go back in the sequence, then he even went to pay a visit to the Titanic Museum in Belfast. Now, the Titanic Museum in Belfast, it has a kind of the bow of the Titanic, like a replica of it. So it's this huge. So, but they've also made it look like an iceberg. So we see after the national service announcement, he pops up again, and he's got like the iceberg bow of the Titanic as a symbol in the background of when he's announcing it. And then he announces that the election got underway. Hold on, I'm looking at my notes here. But that's kind of what he announces, that he's running hard against the Tories. Then Farage enters the fray, and they get that's what it was. Farage enters the fray, and you get the biggest gaffe of all, because the next time is that you've got the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and by this time Farage is in the running. And what they wanted to do, I think the NATO countries wanted to make a big song and dance about D-Day 80th anniversary, and it was a sort of collective thing of solidarity against Vladimir Putin. And Rishi Sunak he dropped out and went back. He went off to give a TV show, leaving Macron, Scholz, the bureaucrats from the European Union. Joe Biden was even doddering around the place. And Sunak pulled out. Now, what that tells, this was a disaster. This was just completely farcical, because what that tells you is he doesn't care. They don't care about this big patriotic event, which is, it's part of especially in Britain, the whole bulldog nationalist sort of patriotism, and he doesn't care. And then you had Farage come out and say it was a complete disgrace. So the point here, if you want to be a little bit conspiratorial, is that it actually looks like the Tories are throwing the election. It looks like they don't want to win, which sort of reinforced my view. But then when you get the reform coming onto the scene, then it changes that dynamic, depending on how you want to look at that.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about because again, for Americans, we're not really used to having anything outside of a two-party system, even though technically we're allowed to have more. That's never how it actually plays out. But for for those who are not familiar with the kind of the parliamentary system, what happens here? Because originally it sounded like the plan was just, hey, we just punish the Tories by having not voting for anybody, and then Labor obviously comes into play. They're the ones that are going to win this automatically if everybody who was going to vote for the Conservative Party steps down. A lot of times, I've said this many times, in the United States, if the Republican Party just disappeared, that would be the most, kind of authority shattering thing for our current regime. Like the lack of any pretend opposition to what is obviously the ruling uniparty would be the thing that kind of shatters the illusion of any real opposition, any that you're not just under one party rule. And it sounded like that was more the direction that you guys were going with this. Like, let's just get dispense with the charade. Like, we're going to be ruled by this anyway. But with Nigel Farage coming in and with the Reform Party, does that create a scenario where Farage could become prime minister, or that his party could pick up enough seats to have a serious impact on what's going on there? What's the dynamic in play with that third party stepping in?
Well, it is really strange, because we're in uncharted territory here, because the basically Reform are now beating the Conservatives. But if we can just take a little step back, I think it was before the election or around about that time, there was a lot going on, and Farage had actually said that, I think it was just after, but at any rate, Farage had said he was retiring, and actually he was going to go over to America and campaign with Donald Trump. Farage is a good friend of Donald Trump. And he's backed them for years. But then with the surprise announcement, I think what happened was there was a little bit of house cleaning going on with reform, and some of our friends at the Lotus Eaters got cleared out because they were a bit too spicy. And it was as if we look back at it now and we can see Richard Tice, who was this boring kind of boomer, he was cleaning house, making it safe for Farage to come in, basically. And so when we look at what's happening now, it's the question really is reform for real? Is Farage really out to destroy the Tory party? And it looks like he is. He has said that he wants to be Prime Minister by 2029. And then that will, so if he's playing this for real, if he's doing this in earnest, then that's wonderful, because it would be a better scenario than, well, we're just going to have to kind of grit our teeth and deal with Labour, because then we'd have actually something pretty decent. Now, you've got the problem with Farage in the past is that he does have a tendency of building up a big head of steam and then walking away from it and it'll implode. That's what happened with Brexit. That's what happened with the Brexit party. People, and you see, the problem that you run into here is that you don't want to blackpill people. Like I've got doubts about this. I hope it works out like this. But when you then say, okay, you may not want to get too carried away, like go for it, but just be wary of where this can go, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of broken hearts a few months from now if he's playing golf with Donald Trump. And it's all over, basically, because that could very well happen. But if we take him at his word, he's in it for the long haul. He's going for a seat down in Clacton, which is on the south coast of England, which is a traditional white working class, and they've got a track record of voting for these kinds of parties, basically. The other sort of scenario is that the Conservatives they're taking a big haircut here. They're really going to get decimated. It came out yesterday that they've actually got no more money left or anything because some of their big donors have pulled out. And so they've begun saying to their candidates across the country, basically, you're on your own. We can't afford to fund you. It's such a dire emergency. It's as if they're pulling all of their resources back to protect a few core seats in the South. So it's like, that's it. It's like you're left up there. You're left up there beyond the wall. You know, where you're on your own. We've got to. It's a retreat. We've got to hunker down and just try and sort of spend what resources we have on saving a few core seats. Otherwise, we're taking it out. For example, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is set to lose his seat in the general election. That's never happened before in British history. It's unprecedented because, as I was saying earlier, they'd always like if you're playing chess, they'd always have their best pieces in the safest positions.
Right.
And it looks like there's just no safe seats. There's no safe positions left for the Tories. And so the danger here is that if you want to have a more negative take on where this is all going with reform, is that somewhere down the line they'll be folded into the Conservative Party. I'd really like some assurances from Farage, from Reform, that that's never going to happen. And to be fair, he's been really negative and hard on the Tories on social media and on the election campaign. But I would really like this kind of cast iron. We will never do deals with them. We will never, our aim here is to put them down and put them down for good. It's shocking how hated the Tories are. I mean, I think Dan on Lotus Eaters had a good take because he ran the numbers on where all of this could go. And he said, what was it? The double tap strategy, where it's not enough to just shoot them once. You've got to do like the double tap in the head. You've got to do this because they'll get up and come for you again in a few. It's like the T1000. We're going to shatter it. We're going to freeze it and then we're going to shatter it. And this is the time to throw it into the molten core. This is the time to throw it into the furnace. Don't just stand there and watch it kind of accumulate and draw itself back together slowly but surely. And the problem is, I saw a thing the other day which was pitched on Twitter, and it was the Reformed Conservative Party, and they'd merged the two slogans, and it was somebody kind of messing around. But I thought, oh God, here we go. Here comes. I can see the knife in the shadows flickering here. But we'll just have to see. At the moment, I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping there's maximum damage on the Tory party. It's white pills so far, because at the end of the day, we didn't expect reform. We didn't expect this sort of new populist surge. But again, I've got a caution. Yeah, it's great. It's a good time. But I've ran round on this carousel too many times to get carried away. I've been burned too many times. I want reform to do it. I want the Tories to be destroyed. But keep an eye out for that flashing blade in the darkness, because it's been in our backs a long time. And there's a possibility that there'll be something going on behind the scenes that says, okay, we're going to merge the two. Or, sorry?
Oh, no, I was, go ahead.
Or there's some shenanigans going on with seats. That will be a slightly different scenario, where people start to say, well, we're not going to run against these here and that. I haven't seen any of that from Reform. So far, that's great. I mean, there's a possibility that Labour will, if we're going to have this super cynical view of the Uni Party, it's possible. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's possible that Labour might concede, like sort of pull out of a few seats to let the Tories cling on to something in the event that they're going to get completely destroyed. But as it stands now, it's just a complete rout, and it's I'm not going to take it away. I'm cynical, and I tend to be, I'm known as being a bit of a doomer. But even I'm thinking, yeah, I'm liking the vibe at the moment. I can't resist it, and it's terrible, because I feel I should know better. I should, and I'm going to regret this. It's going. He's coming in. He's got his flowers. He's got his box of chocolates, and I'm no. But it's the old magic's beginning to work again.
Morgoth the Optimist puts on something pretty. Yeah, no, it's
but who knows? Who knows? It's too early to tell. But at the moment, it's good, and it's great to see just the rout of the Tory party.
I like the idea that, like, if you don't get all of Rishi Sunak, like if his pinky finger is left somewhere, then it'll reform into, Skynet will rebuild itself out of that. We have this cycle in the United States that's happened over and over again. We can kind of commiserate with you guys on this, where every, I'd say, 12 to 15 years, you get like an insurgent movement inside conservatism. There's a new right. There's the Tea Party. There's the MAGA coalition. There's this populist uprising that you get under Pat Buchanan or Donald Trump, and all of a sudden there's this energy, there's this shift, there's this vibe that there's a real opposition to the controlled scenario that we have in the United States. And what happens over and over again is that movement happens for a while. They toss out a couple of mildly relevant people, but the trick that keeps happening, the reason I feel like the populism never breaks through, and this is always true populism. Our good friend AA will tell you all about this. He's got a book about it. The problem with populism is ultimately it's not organized. And so what happens is over and over again, that populist sentiment rises to the top. There's the energy, there's the vibes. Everyone's feeling good. We had that with Trump, but the first time around, you got the meme energy happening. Everybody is optimistic about what comes next. But then when the administration kicks in, there's only so many people who are actually qualified to do certain jobs and get appointed to certain positions and manage certain infrastructures. And slowly but surely, the establishment kind of works its way into that movement. And a few years later, everyone's a Tea Party conservative or a MAGA conservative in the United States, but they're all just doing everything that the Republican Party has done for decades. We're hoping this time, that there is enough infrastructure being built outside of the system to push back against that. But is that a similar problem in kind of the UK dynamic where you do get these waves of populism, but because there's only ever it's so often only organized around like one charismatic guy or a few people. There's never infrastructure that's actually creating the sustained organized political structure, that ultimately this always gets subsumed by that kind of merger of the parties or the control of the establishment.
Yeah, that's the entire story of Brexit. Now, Nigel Farage again was pivotal, crucial in making Brexit happen. And then he kind of walked away from it. Now, to be fair, he wasn't in government. But what happened was that because there were he basically using UKIP, he was threatening to take a big chunk out of the Conservative vote over the issue of the membership of the European Union, which had long been a thorn in the side of the Tories, because you had the more sort of more progressive ones who wanted to be in there, and then you had the old, more Little Englander ones who wanted to be out. And so David Cameron at the time decided, I'm going to call his bluff and we're going to have a referendum, and I'm going to assume he loses. So that when UKIP lose, it'll destroy them as a party. That energy will go nowhere. And then we will also put to bed this issue within the Tory party itself. Now, as it happened, they lost the referendum, which was a disaster. And you had that whole meltdown. Now, in the actual referendum campaign, you did have Tories such as Boris Johnson. Dominic Cummings was another one. Michael Gove, who's a proper swamp creature, was in on it. And so what happened was that when it became time to actually take us out of the European Union, that was when the knives started to come out. It was every step of the way. It was just made this most laborious process you can ever imagine, to the point where people just became completely exhausted with it. And what they knew was that it was actually against immigration, because at the time, they say it wasn't, but at the time, of this going on, you had all of these immigrant waves with the refugee crisis washing all over through. Merkel was allowing them into Germany. There was also talk at that time of allowing Turkey into the European Union. And all of these things were terrifying to Middle England. And we want out of this, and we want to just sit on the island and be safe from it all. And that's what won the day. And the Tories knew that that's what won the day. But what they actually did with that was feed it into a new narrative, which they called Global Britain. And their reframing of it all, this is how scummy they are. Their reframing of all of that whole saga was that, well, what we've learned from this is that the people of Britain want to be more open and more global. They don't want to be stuck in the constraints of the European Union with all these boring countries like France and the Netherlands. They want to be open to India and Africa, and
a little more North Africa in my that's what I'm looking for.
This is what they really meant. They want to be open. It's global Britain. It's going to be Singapore on Thames was a thing that they said as well. So it was just, again, like typical of what you were saying. All of that sort of populist energy was rerouted back into the system itself, probably with a bit more of a neocon Atlanticist stripe or something like that. But that Brexit is the perfect example of how they kind of took the blows and then reformulated a plan to make it work from on high.
I'm curious to what you think about this wider right-wing populism across most of Europe and even the globe in some cases. Yeah, it's weird. The United States, the media just calls everybody, to the right of Mao, that country's Trump. So Bolsonaro was, that country's Trump, and Nigel Farage is the UK's Trump, and you have Le Pen, and you have Macron, and sorry, it was the lady in Italy. Suddenly has escaped me. But like Gerd Wilders and all these people, like it's always, they're the crazy, they're the they're the new fascist. Maloney, that's the one in Italy. But it's always, these people are radically right wing. They're the Trump of their areas, and I think it's hilarious because Trump isn't even mildly right wing. So I guess that maybe that is accurate with so many of these people. But how many of these kind of right wing populists that are all pushing against immigration is usually their central issue, though they so often fail on that issue? How many of these people do you think are genuinely right wing? How many do you think are just kind of picking up that torch at the moment to otherwise control the conversation? Is there a real right wing, centered around opposition to immigration across a lot of Europe, or is this a lot of window dressing that's been put on, you think, to contain the sentiment of countries that are otherwise being deluged by all these migrants?
Well, I think there's, because it's a lot of different parties, and it's a pick and mix. So Meloni in Italy, she was touted as being, like, like a literal fascist. And I don't mean that to be in the way that everybody's fascist these days, but like literally in the political lineage of like Italian politics. But then she turned out to be just another globalist. She turned out to be, it's the highest immigration ever, and I think a good bellwether to kind of see this. I mean, Le Pen has been around forever, and so is her dad in France, and she's kind of part of the French establishment at this point, but she's drastically watered down her policies it's not even called the National, it was the National Front, and then it was the National Front National. Now it's like National Rally or something. And there's this constant softening. Now, what she would do in power, we don't know. But I think when you look at how the establishment is reacting to the party, it tells you quite a bit. And I would say where they're most worried is with the AfD in Germany. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about them just being completely banned. And they're not even, another thing to consider in Europe is that we are up to well, in Britain we are, and even though, again, thanks Tories, but on the continent as well, everybody's up to their neck in hate speech laws. So there's only it's like you're on YouTube all of the time. You've just constantly got to watch what you're saying. You don't want to break any rules. And people in Germany in particular, they have that. And there was some talk a while ago that they were just going to ban the AfD. But they're now one of the biggest parties there. And, they are organized. So they've got message discipline. And the German government is looking for, they're constantly saying that, investigating them for this or that, the other, constant harassment. And this genuine fear. I think they're up to 20% of the vote or something. And in back to reform, what I've noticed is a shift now where you've had these UKIP kind of parties and they didn't get that much of a hard time. And I think there's elements in the media and in the political establishment beginning to get uncomfortable where this is all going. Because there's a sense where, okay, I mentioned this on Twitter recently, where it was inevitable that the Tories were going to get like a good kicking at this election. And I think it's beginning to dawn on them now. Like the idea is we kick you to death. Like this isn't just going to be, we're going to give you a good pounding at the election, and then you're going to pick yourself up, and then it's the same cycle over again. It's like, no, like we really do want to end your party. And now there's this new insurgent party came out, which is going to either stab us in the back or help us do it. And that remains to be seen. But within Reform's manifesto, what I was actually quite impressed with was that there was a lot of populism in there, but there was a lot of stuff about throwing out something like the Equality Act, which we've only had since 2010, and it's kind of our version of the Civil Rights Act. And they are on about throwing that out. And making changes in the civil service. So for us, I think that's the proper red meat, because what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we're going to have a look at the power structure itself. how it functions, and we're going to start shutting things down. We're going to start pulling the Lego bricks out, and we're going to start to restructure things at how the system actually functions. That was the best. So there's a lot of stuff in there about the World Health Organization and stopping the small boats and all of this. But there was some stuff in there which impressed me, which was actually about institutional power. So one of the things that I think, when you look at how populism has evolved, and when you're under these sort of extreme restrictions on your speech, which you don't have in America. A lot of people in America say all of these crazy incendiary things, and we just can't do that. And I think it makes you have a much more sober analysis, where you've got to watch what you're saying, but you're thinking more structurally about the system itself, because you're aware of the institutions. So an institution like Ofcom, which is blocking you from what you're saying, and you think, why do we have that? Why is there a Quango, or an organization like Hope Not Hate, and all of this? And I think that there's a tendency to look at things in a more structural way in Europe. So the policies on is kind of far right, as what a lot of people would like to think. But what I'm seeing is that there's a lot more sort of concentration on the mechanisms of how power works itself. And I think this is what scares the establishment, especially in somewhere like Germany, because if somebody starts to pull out all of those hate speech laws, or fiddle about with the German constitution and this kind of thing, they're worried about that a lot.
Yeah, we're starting to get that too in the United States. There's a lot of kind of panicked articles. John Oliver just did one of his terrible monologues about this on HBO. But constantly getting this, oh man, the right is actually starting to figure out that institutions matter, that structure matters. Kind of the populist insurgents are starting to figure out that you need to have your own bureaucrats, you need to have your own NGOs, you need to build up your own kind of counter organizations to step in and fill all these managerial slots. And so there's a lot of panic, because for the first time in a long time, the right is actually looking at the systemic causes of the problem, rather than just saying, "Well, we win an election, then it's fine," right? Because we did the thing, and so we are seeing a lot of panic here. Before we go to the questions of people, I wanted to ask you one more thing. You said this somewhere earlier in the interview, and I just wanted to ask you, because it has my head scratching. I've written an entire book on why it's important for a lot of these managerial elites to globalize, right? Like they open the borders because it breaks down identities and traditional understandings of society. It breaks down the particulars of these different religions and peoples, and the history and traditions that they have, to make it easier for them to be managed and to be siphoned off as capital, and everything else. We're familiar with all of this stuff, but as you said, the managerial elite in England, they're not bad at their job. They're good at it, and then their job was to do what it is. The system is what it does, and what it's doing right now is dismantling historical England, and trying to displace the people who live there. And this has again been kind of the job of most Western governments, it seems, at this point. But when you look at all of the factors being involved, you look at, like you said, the strain on infrastructure, you look at and the NHS, and all of these different things that are simply not going to survive the continued flood of migrants. Like I think there was a recent study from England that telling us all what we already knew, that the mass immigration had not had the expected economic benefits on your country, and instead it was a disaster, and in wasn't bringing the promised generational longevity of those institutions that were supposed to be buoyed by the increased population, but was also just bringing all the problems that come with that population, like housing and everything else. At some point, it really does feel like these people are bought into a system that even they know has to destroy itself, right? Like there's no sustainability to this. The argument that these people coming in will buoy the infrastructure through economic development. They'll cover over for lost populations, which is already a horrible argument, because those people have a right to their own countries. But anyway, that's been the economic argument for this. That seems to be falling apart. What do you think continues to drive this, even in the face of what is obviously just a lie about how these managerial systems will be able to continue themselves by bringing in vast amounts of foreigners?
I honestly don't know. I don't know. I think we're reaching the point now where they're saying we've got a problem because if you look at the population of just of England, which would be officially probably about 60 something million, that would be one of the smallest American states.
Mhm.
And so it gets to the point where yeah, you can shut people down for being racist or all of the political correct things, but they're now reaching a point where it's infrastructurally just no longer feasible for this to carry on. Um, and there has to be some kind of correcting mechanism to that. Now, what you could say is that when Labour come in, they will actually bring it down. So this is what something like what AA would say was that they're going to be just sensible. They're going to be they're still going to be, it's still the system, but they're going to be more pragmatic and they're going to look at the numbers and they're going to do it. But the problem is if we take I mean, I think the last few years of inflation have been completely insane because they were doing that there's a phrase going around, quantitative easing with people, where during the pandemic
That's
they
horrific, but yeah, go ahead.
it's a horrible term,
Yeah.
but I've seen it going around a little bit. And basically, the idea is they printed off all of these hundreds of billions during the pandemic that they were terrified of inflation kicking in afterwards. So they just kind of flooded the zone with bodies, this quantitative easing with people to sort of sponge up and absorb all of this money so the economy didn't tank. So we may actually see the numbers come down. The problem is those people are here now. And even even sort of moderate numbers which get thrown around are more than peak Tony Blair numbers now. And yeah, you have you have to think how long can this go on? I just don't see that it can. The housing where you just can't get on the housing ladder anymore. I mean, the one of the things that the sort of the liberal side of this will say is that it's it's the fault of the Tories for not building enough houses or this and it's then you get into the scenario where you're just concreting over the whole country. But even then, they'll say there's all of these infrastructural problems, and that's the problem, not the immigrants themselves. And what gets me is that you can say, okay, well, why don't we put a halt on immigration for 2 years until we get all of that done, even though they've got no way to get that done, but they wouldn't have that either. So the flood continues, even despite the fact they know, even if you say, okay, we need the infrastructure, you're right, they still won't halt it. It's like it's you know what I mean? It's like, well, let's build the bridge first. And like, no, we just carry on jumping over the edge. We'll
Yeah,
try and build it as we go.
it's amazing. We have the exact same dynamic here where it's just, oh, well, the infrastructure is the problem. Okay, well, why don't we just reduce the number of people coming in while we fix the infrastructure? Oh no, we need like 100 million more people. The infrastructure is failing, but we need to have 100 million more people. We just need to spend double that in infrastructure. It's like, well, even if you did, you'd never catch up. Like the amount of people you're bringing in, you will never catch up. Even if we dedicated like the wealth of the top, 500 wealthiest people in the United States to building the infrastructure projects we're talking about, we couldn't possibly keep pace with the amount of people you're letting in. Well, we don't care. The open borders are not the problem, no matter what.
Yeah, it's and a lot of these people will consider themselves green as well. So at the
Right.
same time that you've got I mean, one of the big things that Labour are going to go all in on, I think, is the net zero stuff. So that like at the regulations going to come in to make it even harder. I mean, a lot of people will say this is all part of a sinister agenda to get everybody living in 15-minute cities or whatever. It's difficult to refute it when you're looking like, how else are you going to live?
Yeah, there's that legendary Twitter quote of the no, America is not full. We could grind everyone down to a fine powder and fit another 20 grillion people into every city. Yeah.
Yeah, to get back to the what's been happening, Farage is really hammering all of these points. So you can say, look, even if it's containment, even if you want to have the most cynical attitude, what he's saying is objectively true. And I think when you're reaching these sort of critical numbers on infrastructure and on things beginning to break down, you can step forward and say, look, everybody knows this is bad. Somebody's going to have to say it here. The system needs to correct itself. Something we can't, it's that whole thing. We can't go on like this, as they said in the Soviet Union. We just can't live like this anymore.
All right, guys. Well, I brought you white pilled Morgoth, so you can all, make sure you save this one. I don't know if you'll ever see it again, but if Morgoth is delivering some hope and some white pills on this one, then bye, I guess.
Well, I will say, prepare yourselves. Enjoy it while it lasts, because you're facing 10 years of labor. 10 years of hard labor is coming towards you.
All right, there's the Morgoth we know and love. There it is. Okay, it's back into character. All right, let's go over to the questions of the people. But before we do, man, can you let people know where to find your fantastic work?
On YouTube and on Substack. Almost everything that I do goes on Substack. I'm going to drop a little article later tonight or tomorrow about the thing that happened with Stonehenge and the kind of bugman attitude of saying it's just a pile of rocks, which I'm going to touch on that. Get into a little bit of esoteric stuff with that.
Yeah, so strange that these Stop Oil guys never protest by like wrecking a civil rights monument or a Holocaust museum, or it's always something of historical beauty connected to the nation. So strange.
I do. I mean, I do have a little. I do find it fascinating that in Stonehenge in particular, it was this pagan site. It was for measuring the sun and the moon and celestial bodies, and in particular, the sun is like sort of really important to druids and fertility rites and all of this. And it's like the climate change activists. They if you look at it all, they hate the sun. They hate the life-giving form. They hate it's literal death cult. They shriek away. We hate the sun. We have to wage war on the sun. And I'm going to touch on that in a little article on Substack.
All right, looking forward to it, guys. Let's grab your questions here. Elijah Times says, small government conservatives reject exercising state power and view themselves as Frodo casting the ring into Mount Doom, but in reality, they're Denethor telling the defenders of Gondor to abandon their post. Yeah, over and over again, we see this excuse. We can't take power. We're not those guys. We don't take action. That's against our principles. By the way, have you noticed the entire country is falling apart because the other side constantly exercises power? That's their principle. Let's see here. Life of Brian says, the notion of Tories as accelerant of radicalism goes to Auron's point that conservatives are just embarrassed liberals. Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. The fact that getting rid of these guys, would create this nightmare scenario for the system, like you're seeing now, probably means that. It's not probably. It's very clear that the Tory party has been operating as just a control for what is already a progressive agenda. There was never any real pushback there, I don't think. Or do you think there was ever any pushback from that side, Morgoth, or has this always just been complete containment
within the Tory party?
Yeah.
You maybe have a lone voice here or there, but they're completely powerless. The Tory party exists only to contain to its right. What makes what's happening now so interesting is that because of the censorship and all kinds of sort of MI5s, intelligence ops, there wasn't anything to contain. You can this term containment gets bandied around so much, but in Britain, there'd been such a hatchet job done on right-wing organizations and new parties. They'd been butchered and censored off everything and had debunked to such a degree that there was nothing to contain. There was nothing left. And now we've got it just popped out of the ether.
It really was amazing to me when Sunak was just like, yeah, we'll just shut down the kid's bank account. Just so casually, like, yeah, we'll just make it impossible for you to buy or sell. What? That's a standard thing that we do. It's like, wow, man,
Yeah,
that's
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 just how we
powerfully
roll.
evil in public. Okay. Let's see here. Anon Reviewer says Brian McCallahan refers to neocons as Straussian. What is Straussian exactly? So he's referencing the philosopher Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss is famous for a couple of things, talking about the difference between the moderns and the ancients. I'm actually reading Strauss's thoughts on Machiavelli at the moment. I'm not a Straussian in any sense, but he does have some interesting things to say about Machiavelli. I think when most people talk about Straussianism, there a lot of people think of Strauss as one of the key philosophers for the neoconservative movement. Also, on another level, people talk about neocons being Straussian because Strauss famously says that a philosopher needs to communicate on two levels. He needs the kind of esoteric, um, uh, uh, this is only for the people who will understand it. I need to write at one level just for the people who will read heavily into this and will do the work to find its real meaning. And then he also has kind of lower resolution version of this, which is everyone should get. So there's something to understand at Machiavelli at one level if you just read the Prince with a basic reading, but then there's like a whole another level of meaning if you understand all the background and all the references he's making and all the history and things that are being brought in. He says the same thing about Plato. And so a lot of people think this is where neocons get their idea that you can like lie to the people because it's necessary to only tell them part of the truth. There's like a noble lie that you present to the people about what your motivations are, why you're going to war, or these kind of things. And then there's like the higher level of what you're actually operating at. There's more to it, but that's kind of a basic explanation of why a lot of people identify neocons as Straussians. Tiny Stupid Demon here says, nonsense. Cthulhu assures me that if I just vote for him one more time, he'll finally start swimming right. Yes, the classic siren's call of just one more vote, just one more time, guys. This election will change it all.
It's true, isn't it?
I mean, we're enduring it now with Trump, though it does feel just in the same way that you guys are. It feels like something might be in the air. You know, the fact that they're literally trying to imprison Trump does make it feel like this might actually be real politics and not fake politics for once. Um, Robert Weinsfeld says, "Save ourselves first, but here's a neocon nation building project: invade Canada, England, Australia, liberate all our fellow English speaking peoples." Yeah, like reverse this. Yeah, like America goes on a tour. Of course, many people would say America has already conquered those nations, and that's why we're here in the current situation, or at least the global American empire. I guess you can take whatever reading of that you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, one of the funny things that's happening is one of the big discussion points is what's called the European Court of Human Rights, which Churchill actually invented. And there's a lot, I think there's about like 40 or 50 countries signed up to it, mainly in Europe, and then, over into some of those little Russian states under Russia are in it as well, I think. And of course, if you're signed in to the European Court of Human Rights, this is used by the conservatives. They'll say, we can't stop people flooding across the English Channel on boats because we're signed up to that. We can't remove them. We're bound by that treaty. Now, people have said you just ignore it.
Right.
The discussion is that if you leave that, you're no better than Russia or China or these countries. But I'm looking at these: Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They're not signed up to the European Court of Human Rights. It's not as if they're like authoritarian dictatorships who are torturing people. I mean, they're just as libtarded as everybody else. But the point of it is that it's just this idea that you're going to immediately be, if we don't have this liberal institution with their friends in charge, because that's what it's about, of course,
Right.
then we're immediately going to become like Putin's Russia or something like that. It's just so ridiculous. And by the way, the European Court of Human Rights will not be there when you're Sam Malia and you're locked up for a sticker and you can't see your kids. Then it's true. All of these things we've learned over the years, studied, you see it play out in all of these institutions and the reality of politics.
Yeah, the global liberal order is so selective, and it's always hilarious when they pretend like they're bound by it, as if they aren't the ones who are completely constructing it in the first place. Like international law is a joke. There's no such thing as international law. That's not what that word means. And so whenever people are like, "We're bound by the international law," it's like, no, you're just manipulating people. But let's see. We've got emendations here says if the regime does indeed push the start hot war button now, uh, what will be the impact on the UK? And is AA correct that all dissent will cease? Yeah, what do you think about that? The AA's thesis that this is all gearing up for us to go back to
Well,
war, and once they hit this button, it'll all be
uh,
silent.
to be fair, when that's it's my thesis.
Ah, okay.
But I've been looking at geopolitics for a long time. I mean, he comes to the same conclusion as I do, where I mean, I did an article a while ago called "The Online Rights Kobayashi Maru Test," which is
Mhm.
it's a no-win situation. So if you're going to sit in a NATO country and just overtly side with the enemy, you will be taken to jail. You will be at least shut down. They cannot and will. You're in the state of exception. They cannot allow that to stand. And so then, on the other hand, you're kind of in the position of, well, what do I do? So in my case, for example, here, the impact on the UK, there is no way because I don't know what the situation is in America, but we are really getting a lot of hot war rhetoric now. We're getting talk of national service and everything else. So if there's a war with Russia, there's no way that I can sit and write sort of Substack articles or do YouTube videos where I am explicitly siding with Putin and the Russian army against the British government and the British army.
Mm.
It just won't stand. Now you can sort of take a pacifist position, which I would, because I'm not really in any camp, as I wrote recently. I'm in the not slowly dying in radiation and fallout camp. That's the camp that I is that like that's the camp that I'm in. I just want a little bit of sanity to return here, to get to the table and start talking about these things. But yeah, you will have to be very, very careful about what you say, because I actually think there's some people out there who are leading people down the garden path. Because if you're going to go into that situation, there's if you follow certain influencers who are really bombastic, rah 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 pro Putin, it could be that what's actually happening is that they're flushing out the potential traitors to mark them down for further on down the line. So in the event that hostilities actually break out and there's a war situation, they know straight away who is going to go to prison. Because you can't be trusted. If there's countries at war, they can't have you running around siding with the enemy. It's very, very serious. And so the British state will look at my stuff and they'll say he's critical of war in and of itself or the policies of the British government, but he's not overtly siding with the enemy against us. So,
Mhm.
but it's a gray zone.
Yeah. Yeah. Creeper Reader who says, I'd make a put the woke away joke, but it looks like AA's zero seats has him riding high. Yeah, I'm not sure how this bears on the put the woke away bet, but he does deserve credit for getting that term coined, and you guys both pushing that pretty hard. It's kind of wild to see that actually work itself into the mainstream.
Yeah, it's been great.
Creeper Reader also says, how do you guys counter the critique that in order to counter globalism, each nation's right has to form a coalition of nationalist nations? I guess it's enemies of my enemy and enemies of my enemies thing. Yeah, this is something that, for instance, Dugan talks about in the fourth political theory. His solution to this is civilizational blocks. To be fair, this is because Dugan believes that Russia should rule a certain chunk of the world. So to get that out of the way, he has his own geopolitical priorities here. But he is building off the work of guys like Sam Huntington, who understand civilizations as kind of the kind of the imperial blocks as being the building block for like how we actually organize. That he says that the civilization is large enough to push back against globalism. The nation is too small. Others have said that, and I think that there might be some merit to this, that ultimately you just need the incentive structure for large global organizations to break down, and we're starting to see that where the kind of this hyper interconnected globalism becomes a detriment rather than a benefit. Once that happens, then organizing again at the levels of nations makes more sense. But right now, every nation is ultimately driven to at least kind of the imperial level because the benefits of the vast infrastructure is just it's just better. It allows you to keep pace with other powers in a way that focusing simply on the kind of a more natural formation of a nation does not let you do at the moment.
I mean, one of the strange things about the European Union and how it works is that that's what's happening. So, a week or two back, you had all of these nationalist populist parties getting huge amounts of votes. They are actually going to create, or well, there already exists different blocks within the European Union itself where they sit down. And I mean, I'm a bit skeptical if they can actually do much because it just seems to be pure sort of diktat. But yeah, that's so from all over Europe, they will sit together in one sort of wedge, coloured wedge, which will represent nationalists, and it goes around like you'll have like some kind of crazy kind of party from Hungary or Slovakia somewhere with just two guys sitting there who are the most extreme far right thing you can ever imagine is be sitting there. But yeah, the European Union is where something like that actually manifests.
Interesting. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. But thank you so much for joining me, Morgoth. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Make sure that everyone is uh, checking out Morgoth's work. And of course, if it's your first time here on the YouTube channel, make sure you go ahead and subscribe, turn on notifications, click the bell so you can catch streams when they go live. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, you can do that on all your favorite podcast platforms. And if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, it's available on Amazon. It was sold out in Britain, in the UK site, but it's back now, so you can pick it up there. Or you can also go to Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, pick it up at your local bookstore. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and as always, I will talk to you next time.